Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. I am not going to speak a date for this podcast because we're recording it in advance. I'm not quite sure when it is going to run, but we are doing some substitute shows here at the end of the summer so that we can all take a break, and some of us have to take our kids to college, and others of us have to go shopping for school supplies, and some people just need to take a rest. So we'll be doing some special shows. This is the first one that we are taping. And what we're going to talk about today is the Broadway musical. And it's interesting because we have four straight guys here to talk to you about the Broadway musical. Along with me, did I introduce myself?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I don't think I did. So I'm John Podhortz, the editor of Commentary, and with me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And Washington Commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Now, I'm gonna stand back here because this is a topic that I know perhaps better than any other topic that I know on Earth, is the Broadway musical, and so I could just sort of like never stop talking. So we decided we wanted to do some shows about fun things that you all and people enjoy, and do a kind of Hall of Fame,
and that we haven't discussed before,
and then we haven't exactly
we've talked about our favorite books, our favorite movies,
our favorite
sci-fi,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here we have favorite Broadway musicals. Okay, so Matt Continetti, as the progenitor of this show, this was your idea.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you to open the proceedings.
Okay. Well, you're putting me on the spot here. But the truth is, I did come up with this idea mainly because I wanted to hear your answer.
Okay.
And I think the listeners will too. But I have given it some thought, and I was trying to say, what is the show that I've enjoyed the most that I have seen in my life? And I kind of came up with an unexpected answer, and that is a couple years ago, I took my family on a trip to New York City during the holidays, and I saw the Broadway Lion King for the first time. And while I can talk about other musicals that I really like, from Les Miserables to Hamilton to even Miss Saigon or The King and I really came to the conclusion that The Lion King is probably the best Broadway experience that I've had in my 44 years on Earth.
So it's an interesting choice because The Lion King, of course, is an adaptation of the Disney movie.
Right.
And also interesting because the movie, I think, is 72 minutes long,
mm-hmm.
and the show is 2.5 hours long. So one of the weird things about Disney going to Broadway is that they actually
expand
these things into Broadway shows. And so they couldn't be 72 minutes long, though that would be an interesting experience. It's a revolutionary show. The Lion King is the single most successful work of entertainment ever produced. That is, if you tally the movie, the theatrical show, which has been running since 1997, so it's almost
30 years, yeah.
All over the world in various different productions, the DVDs, the VHSs,
the albums,
all of that. I believe the last number I saw was that The Lion King as an individual product has grossed around $11 billion. So it is, without question, the most successful individual piece of entertainment.
And so maybe I should just elaborate why I liked the show, and why, if you haven't seen it, you really ought to. And that's because, of course, as you say, John, it started as a Disney animated feature, really kind of the capstone of an incredible run of Disney animated features, beginning with The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and then I think in '94 is when the Lion King came out. But Disney did something very interesting, which was they hired a experimental theatrical director, Julie Taymor, to adapt the show for Broadway. And Julie Taymor is, she is an artiste. She's kind of like the classic cutout of someone who has deeply artistic sensibilities, and she had studied mask work and puppetry. She had done trips to Indonesia, where she studied kind of Balinese theater as a student, and she brought all these influences into her adaptation of a cartoon. And the effect is electric because, as I'm not making any spoilers here, as many people know, the opening number, Circle of Life, involves the animals processing to the stage from the audience. And the animals are all puppets. They're actors in these puppet-like costumes or masks. And it truly is just a once in a lifetime experience to see this for the first time. So that's one level. The other way in which I really enjoy the show is because they expanded it. They produced new songs. And Tim Rice and Elton John, who did the original songs, and some of these new songs are very well done. And so it's not one of those instances where there's any real weak song, as far as I can tell. Going over the other shows I was thinking of, there's always like moments of, where I could do without that number. But I didn't have that experience in The Lion King, so I got to tell you, I'm gonna go with the crowd here and say that the mass instincts are correct.
See, my experience of The Lion King is that the first 25 minutes of The Lion King, there's almost nothing that has ever come close. And I saw it like the week it opened. So, I've seen it once since with one of my kids or something, but no one had ever seen anything remotely like this ever before. And the audience spends 20 minutes gasping because these are just puppets. It's a weird amalgam of, you see the people.
Right.
They're not.
Their costumes.
Her great innovation was to make sure that the faces of the actors are seen inside and around the puppets, and that the elephants who are marching and all that, the elephants are 4 people, each one leg. You can inside, like in a kind of like canopy, suggesting an elephant, and they're just walking down the aisle, and this transformative experience is beyond anything. And I'm not sure the show recovers from it, because you can't, you couldn't, like it's so jaw dropping that I found there was a bit of an overhang until there's a moment there's a fantastic moment a couple of moments in where she does the same kind of magic with a stampede, and then with a storm and stuff like that, where it's just, the invention is beyond belief. But yeah, you're going with the crowd, and I don't see any reason not to say that, the most popular theatrical presentation in history shouldn't get a nomination.
Can't make it on the list.
Right. Okay. So Abe, you're a theater maven. You're a musical maven.
Well, sort of retrospectively. I don't know. I sort of never go now, but
Yeah.
When the idea of this show came up, my first thought was, okay, well, which Sondheim am I going to pick? Because I do love Sondheim. And then I realized that I actually haven't seen many Sondheim shows on Broadway, actually. I did see Follies on Broadway. Love Follies, but I didn't want to pick Follies. So I'm doing a sort of cheat. I have seen Company, but not on Broadway. And I'm not quite entirely sure where I saw it. I want to say Lincoln Center. Is that possible?
I don't think so.
But then it was Brooklyn. I don't know where I saw it.
Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, I've seen it, and I've seen recorded performances of it, and I've seen the documentary of the recording of the album of it, and I'm deeply familiar with Company. And I love Company, which is first came out in, I think, 1970 or 71 or 70.
70, I think.
And it's a very unusual Sondheim music. I love Sondheim because I love obviously the lyrical play, but also his very odd approach toward musical motifs and angular melodies and dissonance and overlapping melodic lines and all that stuff. But Company is very unusual. It's about Bobby on his who is a single guy living in the city on his 35th birthday, and all his married friends throw him a surprise party, and it's completely non-linear. It's like a bunch of snapshots, and it sort of keeps returning to the party, and so it's more of this accretion of snapshots that creates a character study of this single guy amid his married friends and what it means to ultimately connect. And I appreciate the uniqueness of it, and it's chock full of terrific songs, including Company and Barcelona and Being Alive, of course, and I don't know, 9 billion others. So I go with Company. I love it. I listen to the album constantly. Not constantly, a lot. Listen to Follies a lot too. Listen to a little Night Music a lot too. Anyway.
I have to show my age because I saw the original cast at my either 9th or 10th birthday party. That was I wanted to go see shows. That's what I wanted to do as a kid in New York. And so my parents, me and my parents and my sister Ruthie went to see Company, which is a very unusual thing for like a 9 or 10-year-old boy to want to see. It was an adult musical about commitment in New York. But it had been well reviewed, and I wanted to see it. And I then listened to grooves off the album. I have a very vivid set of memories of the experience of seeing the show, which also had a famous set. A little like thing about musicals is that there's the musical itself, which can exist entirely independently in your memory from the show because of cast albums and things like that. And then there's like with Matt, with The Lion King, the presentation is all. And Harold Prince, who directed Company, had this famous stage designer, Boris Aronson, build this 1960s set with an elevator, and it's all glass and steel, so it's like an Upper East Side fancy new building. And the image of that in my head, it was as fresh and as sort of dazzling as you could imagine. And I've seen that show 7 or 8 times since I was a kid, and I don't think it's the greatest Sondheim. I mean, I think Sweeney Todd is the greatest work that Sondheim ever wrote, and that Sweeney Todd is, I'm not going to pick it as the best. I think it is the best.
I love Sweeney Todd. I mean,
it is the greatest work of American theater, in my opinion. But so it kind of transcends musical because it's also sort of an opera. But it was the show that changed musical theater forever, in the same way that Oklahoma famously changed musical theater in the 40s. Company turned the musical into something that was often more about the concept of the show than simply a 3-act thing where boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl in a setting. And the score is dazzling, not only because of the dissonance and all of that, but also because he's a master of pastiche. So there are all these songs in it that are evocations of earlier types of songs. Yeah. There's a song called You Could Drive a Person Crazy, which is the Andrews Sisters in 1970. And so, he was a great mimic, and he was, of course, the most brilliant wordsmith in the history of Broadway lyricist. Yeah. So
I just want to say the pastiche stuff really comes out in Follies,
right,
where he does all that.
And Follies is a history of the Broadway musical. Yeah. Some of these shows are very emotionally unsatisfying. Follies is a very emotionally unsatisfying. Yeah. He had difficulty producing things that would get you in your heart because he was so cerebral, and he was also
he wasn't a very emotionally satisfied person, from what I understand.
Right. Yeah,
and that's reflected in the work.
Yeah, that the whole thing about him is that everything is. There's a song in Company called "Sorry Grateful," which is the perfect encapsulation of the theme, the spirit of Stephen Sondheim, which is You're always sorry. You're always grateful. You always think what might have been. Then she comes in, meaning like you're never satisfied. There's life is just ambiguity, and you never settle on anything, and it's a very sad and tragic view of life in the setting that is supposed to be kind of upbeat and sell you on things. But
I'm the it's worse than that guy. Of course, this is
there
what
you
I
are.
like.
You like
there
What do
we
you
go.
want from me?
Okay. Seth, where
So
do you go?
I settled on one of the first musicals that I saw as a kid, and so therefore had this sort of outsized effect on me. But also, when you see things as a young kid, and then you see them again as you grow up at each stage of life, it sort of gives you a different view into it. So mine is The Music Man, because I saw that when I was very young, and I, you know, then you get older and you see the things that you missed, right? I mean, the idea that she keeps dirty books, Chaucer, right, in the library and stuff like that. Like, there's things that a kid just has no frame of reference for, and
Chaucer, Rabelais,
yeah.
Balzac. Right. Those are
So
the dirty books that Marion,
those are
the
the dirty
librarian,
books,
has
right?
in her library. Yeah.
But so as a kid, you know who to root for, because you just root for Harold Hill. You like the guy, like Winthrop likes the guy. You want to believe him, whatever. As a young kid, and then as you get older, you realize that Harold Hill has become the the sort of stand-in for a grifter, to such an extent that Keith Olbermann will be calling Donald Trump, Harold Hill and stuff like that. Like this, it winds its way into politics and all that other stuff. And you just end up seeing it through a bunch of different lenses. But it also, what I like about The Music Man is that it asks the question of how can you be sure, even at the end, can you classify him as a con man, because he sort of comes through, but he doesn't really come through, because the kids come in with the uniforms and instruments, but he never taught them how to play, because he had this what he called the
Think system.
think system.
Yeah.
And it was like, and so you actually end up not really being able to say, oh, he really was a con man with a heart of gold who came through in the end, or he really was just a con man who ruined everything, because there's enough ambiguity even at the end. And the reason there's ambiguity is because the kids are inspired by what they want to be after they meet him. And you have to sort of factor that into a kid trying to teach himself to play the drums or the trombone, or something like that, is a sort of wonderful thing. And Winthrop himself is, he's kind of a sad kid. He doesn't really know his place, and he gets into music, and you see it sort of light him up. And you really wonder, while watching and then afterwards and then seeing it again at different stages of life, what the ethics of each situation are. Is there actually a hero? Is there actually a villain? It's a much more complex thing, because of human agency, because the kids take what they see and try to make something of it. And then you have to contend with, the idea of inspiring kids, and also it asks the question of, are can you really fool anyone, right? The age old question, or the only people who are fooled are people who want to be fooled, right? And there's all these questions about human agency and stuff like that. So The Music Man, to me, I really liked. I loved the show, and then I really liked the idea that it didn't get stale for me as I got older, because it had all these sort of new, relevant situations and applications and lessons and stuff like that.
The Music Man is part of a very small but remarkable tradition on Broadway, because unlike these are group efforts, right? Company is the music and lyrics of Sondheim, but there's a book by George Firth. There's the choreography by Michael Bennett. There's the direction of Harold Prince. There's the set of Boris Aronson and all of that. Music Man is one of these rare works. It, Oliver, Hamilton, Rent. These are all works that were written entirely by one person, book, music, and lyrics. And Music Man is maybe the first classic musical that has this form. And it's based on the memories of Meredith Willson, who's a man, not a woman, and was a kind of famous person in America in the 1940s and 50s. He was a band leader. He was on, I can't remember whose radio show, Bob Hope's radio show maybe. And then he wrote a couple of memoirs of growing up in Iowa that are the kind of source material for this memory of 1915 Iowa and the town that he grew up in. And I read a remarkable book about the making of this musical and about Wilson, and a story of how these things happen, which is that his initial idea was he was going to write a show about a non-verbal kid, a kid who could not speak, and who is saved by this grifter who comes to town in weird and unusual ways. That kid then morphs into, over the course of writing it for 5 years, into Winthrop, the character you mentioned, who is the younger brother of Marion, the librarian, the love interest, who has a terrible speech defect. That means that he won't speak because he has this horrible speech defect. And Wilson wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and Frank Lesser, the composer, lyricist, producer, encouraged him and pushed him and got him to, and then they revised it, and then this thing comes out that doesn't sound like anything else ever before it. Opens with this spoken number with 4 salesmen on a train doing what we would now think of as a rap in the beat of the train. So they are sounding like a train coming into a station with whistles, and it's all in their voices. And again, no one had ever heard anything like this before. And they're putting this con man character in the middle of the show, who in the climax of the show is going to be lynched. Like, this is not like the townspeople are coming after him because they've discovered that he's conned them, and their intention is to string him up and hang him from a tree. That's another weird element of some musicals like Oklahoma and others that people forget because they have such an exuberant experience of it. Oklahoma has a death in the middle of the second act where Curly, our protagonist, stabs and kills Judd, who is nominally the kind of villain, but is actually kind of like a sad, lonely guy. They have a fight at a wedding, and Judd is killed, and Curly has to stand trial. The show doesn't end with everybody singing Oklahoma. It actually ends with Curly having to defend himself and not ending up at the end of a hangman's noose. It's very interesting. Like these and Oliver, which was another show written entirely by one person, and Hamilton is, I think, the ultimate sort of apotheosis of the show written by one person, because it is this, completely original way of dealing with everything, and it's the biggest Broadway show of the 21st century, and it's changed everything. And but there is this one little sort of side element of the musical where somebody creates the entire show, and it's very rare to have that kind of novelistic authorial vision, because that's not really what the musical is about.
So if you had to recommend one, John, here we go. Drum roll, please.
Okay, so my excuse me, my favorite show of all time is Guys and Dolls. And why is that? I think in the end, because it's the first one I ever knew. And why did I know it? Because my sister Naomi was in it at the Dalton School and played Sister Sarah. And so when I was very little, 3, 4, 5, we sang the songs in the car going to visit my grandmother. So it was the first show that I knew. And it is, I think, understood as one of the greatest 5 or 10 greatest Broadway shows. It has its failings. It has some longeurs in its storytelling. It is the most exuberant, I think, of Broadway shows. It's the most sheerly musical comedy of the musical comedies. And this adaptation of the very singular comic vision of lowlifes of Times Square, second-rate gangsters, thugs, con men, gamblers, horse players, all living on the margins of society in their own weird ways, but having this whole culture of respect and this preposterous formal way of speaking that we now, that was then turned into something serious in The Godfather. We know how everybody talks about the sort of formal conversations, the way that Don Corleone speaks in The Godfather and all that. That actually kind of derives from Guys and Dolls, and that they all speak to each other in this highly articulate argot that makes no sense for the people that they're speaking in, and maybe the single greatest score, song by song by song, on Broadway. But I don't know if it's the greatest. The single best, probably, in terms of its integration of everything, is Gypsy, which is also is a show that Sondheim wrote the lyrics for, but not the music. Julie Stein wrote the music for it, book by Arthur Lawrence, who also wrote the book for West Side Story, directed by Jerome Robbins in a famous directorial thing. That's a show I've also seen 7 or 8 times, and is almost perfect in every way, though it can be kind of ruined because the current production, which is now closing, with Audra McDonald, wildly miscast in the single greatest role in the American musical theater, which is Mama Rose in Gypsy. Totally wrong for it, and an effort to sort of expand her horizons and cast the show, with African Americans in the lead, as opposed to. It's a true story about real people who were white, by the way. Like the Hovick family. And Gypsy Rose Lee, who became a pretentious stripper novelist character, and her sister June, who became a successful actress and also a playwright, and their crazy mother. That's probably the best musical.
And my follow-up is, if there is a book that people should read about Broadway,
Yes.
do you have a favorite?
I have so many, but I would say that the book to read about Broadway, that's also a history of New York, a history of Broadway, a history of everything, is Razzle Dazzle by my friend Michael Riedel, who worked for me at the New York Post. He was our theater columnist. And Razzle Dazzle is the story of Broadway's decline and recovery from the early 60s through the end of the early 80s or late 80s or something like that. And it is both a great social history. It's kind of a political urban history, and a story about just these endless crazy Broadway. Broadway is a font of crazy stories about lunatic actors and psychotic directors and horrible choreographers and just
producers.
And of course the producers, which is also a great show. But one of the stories that is so like elemental in thinking about the changes in American society in the course of our lives is that is a Guys and Dolls story, which is that Frank Lesser, it was his second show, and he had been a successful songwriter, and he was a short guy and prone to fits of temper, though supposedly very nice mostly, but prone to fits of temper. And Isabel Bagley had been cast as the part that my sister Naomi played, Sister Sarah. And she was not getting a number right. She was singing If I Had a Bell, and she was missing a beat, or she was stressing the wrong syllable or something like that. And they were in rehearsals, and Lesser was in the audience, and he kept coming up to the stage and saying, no, try it this way, try it that way. And she was just not getting it. So after about an hour, he walked up to her and he punched her in the face. He either slapped her in the face or he punched her in the face. And nothing happened.
Wow.
Everything went on. I don't even know if he apologized. Sort of, that's Frank. Now he would go to jail. His life would be ruined. The show would close. He would be brought up on charges. He would not be able to work ever again. But it was 1950. Look, you have to slap around a little bit to get the number right. Come on. What?
Guys and Dolls it has a movie adaptation, doesn't it?
Terrible.
All right.
Yeah,
is Frank Sinatra in that?
Frank Sinatra's in it.
Yeah.
In a part. Another little funny story. Now it's so ridiculous. Frank Sinatra gets the part of the comic lead, who is Nathan Detroit, and the actor who played Nathan Detroit on Broadway, Sam Levine, could not sing. He was completely tone deaf, and as a result, he's only in one song, "Sue Me." And if you listen to the original cast album, you can hear why they cut all his songs out, because he can't even speak it.
So they cast Frank Sinatra for a role with one number?
So they had to write. No, they put him in Guys and Dolls, which is the the theme number, and they wrote two songs for him.
I see.
Which aren't good. Adelaide, which is really not a good song. And then Marlon Brando, who couldn't sing, gets the job of the romantic lead, singing like this. My time of day, the dark. Terrible movie.
But another Godfather connection.
There you go, another Godfather.
You sound like I remember when years ago my sister came home from seeing Fiddler on the Roof, but it was the Harvey Fierstein and Rosie O'Donnell led performance.
That was a terrible production for many reasons. Not the least of it, they were substitute. They were the substitutes after the terrible miscasting of Alfred Molina as Tevye in that production. That was bad. Anyway, Fiddler on the Roof is a pretty amazing show, by the way. I wrote a long essay about it in commentary 5 or 6 years ago when it was staged in Yiddish here in New York, and it was kind of dazzling. And I will say about Guys and Dolls that I went to see a production of it in London last year. Very inventive production done by the director Nicholas Heitner at this theater. And this is another thing about these shows, which is that they can be saved or ruined by direction. So a badly conceived show like Gypsy, you can see everything that's great about it, but it will still be not a great experience. And then you can take something that's nothing, and a genuinely great director can spin magic out of it through ceaseless kind of invention. So that, like Dreamgirls, which is not a very good show. This show sort of about Motown and the Diana Ross and the Supremes. Then made into a movie, has one great song in it, but it's otherwise really not very good. But Michael Bennett, the director of A Chorus Line and stuff, single best directed show I've ever seen. It's a show that basically is staged with 4 light poles, no sets, and the light poles move in 500 different ways to create rooms, cities, news conferences, on stage, backstage, side stage, and nothing else. And I've never, it's like it saved the show. It made the show. It created the show. And so that's a fun aspect of it.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that my uncle choreographed Guys and Dolls.
I was not going to go there because I know you.
I'm so private. I'm private on my own behalf.
Yes. So yes, Abe's uncle, Michael Kidd, was one of the 2 or 3 foremost directors of the 20th century, of the modern musical of the 20th century, because he not only did Guys and Dolls, he did the numbers, he did all movies, he did a lot of movies, he directed dozens of shows.
There's a billion of them. Yeah.
And he was also in It's Always Fair Weather, a movie which he co-starred with Gene Kelly. Very odd, depressing musical about disappointed men in their 30s coming together after having served in World War II together. But he's wonderful in it, and he's wonderful in another movie. And then I'll end with this: a movie called Smile, which is about a beauty pageant, California state beauty pageant in the 1970s, that he plays the choreographer of the pageant. And Bruce Dern's in that, and Barbara Feldon from Get Smart is in it. It was written by this great satiric comedy writer named Jerry Belson, and it is one of the great unheralded movies of the 1970s with an amazing Michael Kidd performance. But Michael Kidd's opening number for Guys and Dolls, which is called the Broadway Ballet, and then Fugue for Tin Horns, remains one of the greatest. I mean, you could see it. It was recreated for the movie, so you can sort of see it there. One of the great moments of American theater. So you were remiss, and I was respecting your privacy.
I appreciate it.
Okay. So we have The Lion King, Company, The Music Man, and Guys and Dolls as our. There are so many others. It is the artistic form that is closest to my heart. So I could go on
to be continued.
Forever.
To be continued.
To be continued. And I will say, if you're coming to New York and you want to see a musical right now, the show to see, which is a beautiful and unusual show, is called Maybe Happy Ending, which, if Christine were on, would have been her choice, and she would have talked about it today, but she is not on with us. So in her stead, I will mention Maybe Happy Ending, which sounds terrible because it's about two robots in 2065 Seoul, South Korea. So you may find that an odd topic for a gorgeous musical about love and longing and what it means to be human and all of that, but it is all that. So thanks, and we will be back with more podcasting later. So for Matt, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.